Hey nerds, what's up? Today I'm finally reviewing a book that I've been meaning to get to for a long time. I actually pre-ordered Blood Over Bright Haven by ML Wang, obviously before it came out, which was over a year ago now, and I just kept not getting to it even though it was right on my nightstand. Like, I was excited to read it. If you've been around, you'll know that ML Wang's other book, The Sword of Kaigen, is one of my top 10 standalone fantasies of all time. I simply love that novel. So I was really excited for this. I got busy with SPFBO and then The Song of Ice and Fire, and I just kept not getting around to it. And so when Del Rey reached out, because this was a self-published book, and then Del Rey picked it up, and they reached out to me and asked if they could send me their copy, and I of course immediately said yes, because I'd been wanting to read it, and look how gorgeous this is. I actually love it. So I'm excited to say I finally read it. This is sort of a difficult one for me to rate and talk about, because on the one hand, I absolutely loved this novel and was blown away, and I'm gonna call this novel a must read, especially if you liked Sword of Kaigen. The character work is so strong in this, and the plot was gripping. I think I read this in 2 days, maybe 3 days, but I couldn't put it down. I was staying up late to read it. It was so emotionally moving for me. That said, I do have some problems with the execution of this novel that I feel like needs to be reflected in my score. My overall rating for this book ended up being 4 stars, and today I'm gonna go over what I loved about the novel, some of the things I had issues with, and I will start in a non-spoiler review and then move on to a spoiler review so I can talk about some of the specifics. But as always, that will be clearly marked in the chapters, so if you haven't read the novel, you can just stop after the non-spoiler review. With that being said, I'll see you after the jump. So this book is a dark academia book, and it follows the main character, Skiona, as she's worked her entire life to study and attempt to become a part of the all-male mage kind of ruling class of the society, and she ends up being the first woman to succeed in entering their ranks. And she lives in this world that is plagued by something known as the Blight that kills and takes humans and animals, and they don't really know why, but she herself lives within a city called Bright Haven, which has a barrier that protects them from that blight. This book is a pretty heavy book, and it deals a lot with sexism, racism, and colonialism. So starting off with the things I love, I think it's just funny that ML Wang and I maybe are on the same wavelength, or have some experiences we share, because it feels like she's always creating a female character that I deeply relate to. First, she did this exploration of motherhood that I hadn't really read before in Sword of Kaigen, and this time it's a female in a male-dominated field in academia. As such, I felt deeply connected to Skiona, and I felt like she was fantastically written. She really came to life for me on the page, and I think a lot of the experiences she deals with were, for the most part, really well done, and I could tell that because it was bringing up stuff for me. I was reading it, and I'd sometimes just get so agitated and stressed and frustrated, and I realized I was feeling those feelings because some of her experiences were just sounding so similar to my experience. Not always, mine not as dramatic, obviously, but in a major that was 90-10 male-female, I experienced some of that stuff, and so it was really interesting how that actually was bringing up past experiences, and it was well done. It was getting a very big emotional reaction out of me. And Skiona is such a flawed character. I loved the exploration of her ego and drive. And I think it's so easy in this type of character to only make that positive. And I think it's so interesting how Wang really explored the negative sides of that while keeping true to her character, and that was really well done and unexpected. There's something about the way that she writes that really gets to the heart of the struggle and the heart of real human emotions, and it just solidified to me that Wang is just such a good character writer. There were also several moments in this novel that brought me to tears, and they weren't necessarily the bigger moments that are obviously really upsetting and depressing. Sometimes I think those get so big they don't elicit that emotional reaction, but there were several moments between two characters that were kind of quiet little moments that were so moving, and often in a very heavy book, the things that moved me the most were the spots of brightness and the spots of care, and I think they were written so well. Like I said, they brought me to tears because it felt so moving. It was just so well done. Outside of the character moments though, I also felt that the story was just gripping. It was visceral. The first chapter was incredible. I was hooked literally from the very first page. She opens with a bang, and I stayed up late, like I said, reading this book. Like, I couldn't put it down. So I think it was such a great blend of a really gripping story that keeps your attention, but also some deep character moments that really emotionally move you. And I think because she centers her characters, Skiona and Tommel, so much, that's what helps her hang so many issues onto the novel and keep it grounded. Because I have complained before, when I read a novel that is all issue, it can be difficult to get invested in it, because there has to be a balance when you're reading a sci-fi or a fantasy. Obviously, so many sci-fi and fantasies that I love make commentary, but there is a balance of making sure you are telling a story that is engaging while you hang issues on it. And because her character work is so strong and the story was so gripping, I think she had a really solid foundation to do the things that she wanted to do. But on to the parts that I struggled with a little bit is that the book does get unsubtle. And you guys know I've struggled with that. I did a whole video on that. Now, it's hard to say that because what does unsubtle mean? It's a pretty big word that can mean different things to different people. So I'm going to try to be as specific as I can in this non-spoiler section to explain exactly what I mean. The first part is parts of this book became very predictable. I predicted most of the things, maybe not 100% right, but I could tell. And that part in itself didn't necessarily hurt the novel because there's so much else going on. But I think that is an indication of Wang not being as subtle with her ideas that she wanted to put in as she wanted, because there seemed to be only one conclusion with the way that she was writing it. Additionally, with that lack of subtlety for me, I think it was more of a lack of nuance. Now, I don't know anyone's, any author's intention, and I certainly don't know Wang's, what she felt writing it. But to me, as I've said in my other Unsubtle video, there was again at the very end that sense of fear where I think she might have been worried that people would like characters they weren't supposed to like. And so she had to make sure that they were bad characters and that you knew they were bad characters. Because you're worried that your readers won't make the connection of what you're trying to do, that maybe on the surface, things are different than they are underneath. And I think there just would have been more nuance if she had let it be a little bit more questionable. Like, here are some characters, I'm trying not to spoil. So here are some characters that we maybe feel one way about, and maybe we keep feeling that way about them, even when we discover things that aren't good. And maybe your readers won't interpret it the way you want, but that's the risk. Sometimes that happens. And being basically told how to feel about a character isn't as interesting to me because it doesn't offer as much self-reflection. And within that, I think some of the language became a little modern. Not that this book is taking place in such a past that you couldn't have modern language, but it's more modern social language that took me out of the story because I think the story she was telling was so gripping, but we got moments where then you end up feeling like, oh, here's where she's trying to make her point, instead of letting the story that was already, I think, doing a fantastic job of doing that, like trust that your readers will get it. When I think of, I was thinking of like Octavia Butler, for example, who you guys know I love, and she is the queen of making you really sit with a novel. And sometimes that means you don't always get it. Sometimes you have to discuss it. And I think she's not afraid to leave things up for interpretation. And I think that's when you have the struggle as a reader, that's when breakthroughs and real understanding occur, not always when you're being told. As you can see, like, so much I loved about the novel. And so that little part of it, it's okay. And you might be wondering, like, I complained pretty heavily when I read the Calculating Stars for my Hugo's video about how I didn't think that should have won a Hugo because it was so silly and it was so over-the-top representation of sexism and academia. In fact, kind of similar things there, except they didn't cover the colonialism. And if you're wondering why I'm not so harsh on this book as I was on that one, it's simple. It's because Wang did such a good job with characters. Skiona is flawed. She's a part of what's going on as well. She, unlike the main character in Calculating Stars, isn't some like upholding like, I'm the perfect person and everything I've done is right. And so in that way, because there was clearly an attempt at dealing with those issues in a subtle way, it doesn't bother me as much in this novel. I think it's still 100% worth the read because I loved it. I would buy this for people. I would recommend it for people. I just still have to talk about that issue I noticed. I hope that makes sense. So now that we're moving into my spoiler section, I want to go into a few specifics, both of the good and bad. First, in the moments that just moved me so much, I wanted to talk about Alba. Alba as a character I thought was so great. I loved her, well, in the beginning. We're going to talk about Alba at the end of the novel. But I loved how her and her aunt just didn't really understand Skiona, didn't really get it, yet they were so loving and supportive. I just loved that, even in her flaws. And one of the moments I remember being brought to tears is when Skiona finds out about the blight, and she is attempting to perhaps not be living anymore. And Alba grabs her and hugs her and says, "You can't leave us." And it is such a moving moment between those characters. Oh, I felt it so much. And similarly, when Tommel with his niece, there were so many moments between those characters that just felt so full of emotion, especially when Tommel is reflecting at the end about maybe he doesn't need to live because his sister didn't live and, pushed Kara forward as the future. And perhaps his job is to also push Kara forward as their future. That was just such a beautiful symmetry, and again, just really moved me. And I also want to say some of the negative reviews I read about this book didn't like the ending, and I just want to go on record saying that I really liked the ending. I loved that it was very unresolved. It is, because what other ending could happen in a novel like this? You couldn't wrap a novel that is dealing with such heavy issues that are plaguing so many people today and wrap them up with a neat little bow. It wouldn't feel right for the story. And so I really liked the ending personally. So now I want to go into very specifics of what I meant about unsubtlety, because I do have some good examples, and I do want to start with Alba. I was pretty bummed at the last interaction between Skiona and Alba. I thought it was a little bit of a betrayal of Alba's character, but I also thought that this is where we came into a lot of the lack of nuance. Alba all of a sudden being like, "We never got you. You were so selfish this entire time and we never loved you," basically is what that scene felt like, was just such the antithesis to what I had read earlier. And I understand that Wang's purpose was to show the complacency of the entire city, and that even loving people like Alba couldn't deal with it. But I think there was a more nuanced and authentic way to deal with that. How I wish Alba would have ended, we already knew Skiona was selfish, so maybe Alba would say that. But she would say that she still loved Skiona no matter what, because she loved Skiona. And Alba would have been an interesting character too. What if Alba at first was like, "This is horrific. Now that we know that this is the blight, I'm gonna be with you. You're right, Skiona. I'm gonna support you as you try to fight and take this down." But then Alba realizes what that means. No comforts, no cars, no technology. And then maybe Alba starts making excuses. "Well, we don't have to change everything at once. Well, maybe we slowly do this. Well, maybe you shouldn't have showed it to everyone. That was a little intense." And then it would have kind of been this how we convince ourselves into complacency because of inconvenience. The danger is that people would still like Alba. And I don't know if Wang wanted people to like Alba anymore. I wanted them to be shocked. I think she wanted them to be shocked at how horrible she really was. But I think the other one with that nuance does a specific thing. And I'm going to say it after I say my next example, which is of Brigham's ending, I was a little disappointed in as well. The whole poisoning of his women, there's nothing wrong with that plotline in general. I read Radium Girls. That plotline is 100% believable. But wouldn't Brigham as a character been a little bit more interesting if he really was what he said he was in the beginning? He really was this person fighting for women's rights, fighting for Skiona. He believed in her. He thinks that women mages belong in the Mage Council. And yet, he is still complacent in this murder. He is still complacent in not advocating for the rights of Quen women. He's not actually... she has this whole moment where Skiona wanted to see him drop his facade because it was fake. And, he only supported me because it was for his legacy and his power. And wow, he really is been a bad guy this entire time. And it's like, what if though? That's real. There are villains in real life, horrible, complacent people responsible for the murders of thousands to millions of people who love their wives, who support people. Wouldn't that just been a little bit more nuanced? And the thing about both of those is, wouldn't you be able to see yourself in them a little more? When everyone becomes such a villain, I think it's easier to divorce yourself from those people. Well, I wouldn't be complacent like that. Well, I would never tell my cousin that I hated them like that. I would never be poisoning tons of women or whatever. But I maybe could see myself in a character who, once the going got tough and they had to give up a lot, decided that maybe they didn't want to. Maybe I could see myself in a character who is really gung-ho on the rights of some people and not others, and can turn a blind eye when it's not affecting the direct people I want to affect. Maybe that would cause a little bit more self-reflection and maybe anger and maybe frustration. And isn't that kind of the emotion that the book is trying to elicit? Because there's clearly a very big, it's not a very veiled metaphor about what's going on today. And I just think when we lose that nuance and subtlety, yes, she made it clear where she stands on the issue, but I also think you might lose some of the self-reflection in the novel. And I hope that makes sense. I know this novel was super important to Wang. I really loved reading the message that was included in the book box for the Del Rey version, which talked about, she said it was like an exorcism of her worry and stress of these experiences and where the world is going. And I felt that in the novel. I felt it. And I wonder if that did influence the ending a little bit, because she wanted people to know, how it felt and how she viewed what was happening. And I get that. But hopefully you understand my critique on that as well. We already had the big villain in Renfro. He was enough, to be the real, villain. And what if we had some of these other nuanced people? And then the last complaint is, I don't think that Skiona and Tamil should have kissed. I think they should have walked away from that moment. But I'm always a grumpy romance person, so I never talk about it because no one can trust my opinions on romance. So to wrap it up, in conclusion, Wang is a must-buy author for me. I will 100% be pre-ordering again her next novel. She's delivered too many times. I think Wang is truly an extremely talented writer and an extremely talented character worker. And even though I had some issues with this one, I don't anticipate it always being that way. I think her stories and character work are strong enough that I think she'll hit a rhythm as she continues to write. And even if not, even if things stay a little unsettled, her work is good enough that I still highly enjoy the book. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And if you have read it, tell me your thoughts below. I'd love to know what you thought, especially on some of my spoiler thoughts if you have read it. And as always, if you like these kind of book reviews, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.